Today in the EU, Bourla, who is the man behind the Pfizergate.
Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla,
Ursula von der Leyen and the CEO of Pfizer.
The text messages that she exchanged with Albert Bourla.
The Pfizergate broke in 2021, revealing that European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen had negotiated a contract for 1.8 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses during the pandemic with Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla in mobile phone texts that remain undisclosed to this day. Today the case returns to the Belgian courts, yet the lingering questions remain. Who is the man behind Pfizergate and what truly occurred? Hello and welcome. I am Evikiori, and this is Who Pulls the Strings of the EU, a mini-series from the Today in the EU team, where we dedicate each episode to individuals that shape the political landscape of the EU from behind the scenes. To understand better who is Albert Bourla, I spoke with Clara Bauer-Babef, Euractiv's health reporter. Clara, as a starter, who is Albert Bourla?
Albert Bourla is the current CEO of the big American pharma company Pfizer.
Indeed, the American Greek veterinarian became CEO of Pfizer in 2019, just before the pandemic. He wanted to make Pfizer's medicines more affordable to more patients, but the pandemic delayed those plans when Bourla decided to shift resources to developing a vaccine. His team got credit for being the first across the finish line in the vaccine race.
For us, it was an opportunity to demonstrate to the world the value that life sciences brings. And we are very proud for what we were able to accomplish. And as you said, it's in the past. So now looking ahead, I wish we can save the world once more.
But his name is now caught in one of the EU's most significant scandals in the recent years, the Pfizergate. So Bourla is truly a Pfizer man through and through. How did his rise to the high ranks look like?
Well, indeed, Bourla has been working for Pfizer for more than 30 years now. So he started to work in Greece, where he was born, as a doctor of veterinary medicine and technical director for the company's animal health division. And after that, he has lived in 7 different cities and 4 countries, still for Pfizer. And then he moved to the US, where he had other executive roles in the company before becoming, in 2019, the CEO.
And Bourla went from being quite known to global recognition during the COVID-19 crisis, earning a spot on Time's 100 health personalities for his leadership in pharma equality. But of course, in the EU bubble, his name became known for his ties with Ursula von der Leyen. Can you tell us a bit about this? What is his connection to EU politics?
Well, in April 2021, during the COVID pandemic, the New York Times broke out the so-called Pfizergate story, revealing that the European Commission President, so von der Leyen, had negotiating a contract for 1.8 billion COVID vaccine doses during the pandemic with Pfizer CEO Bourla
to secure doses of potential vaccines. And tomorrow, we authorize a contract for up to 300 million doses of the vaccine developed by BioNTech and Pfizer. This is the most promising vaccine so far.
And the problem is that the allegations are that the contract was negotiating in mobile phone texts that remain undisclosed to this day.
And the so-called Pfizergate comes down to these text messages that were exchanged between Ursula von der Leyen and Albert Bourla. But what do we actually know about this exchange, and why are we still talking about it now?
I think we're still talking about it because there is an ongoing investigation to try to find exactly what has been said in the text messages. For now, there are only suspicions, and we can't confirm. The investigation will confirm or not what was exactly in those text messages. But the suspicion is that the vaccines deals for COVID-19 were negotiating directly by text messages between Bourla and von der Leyen out of an official and legal framework for trade.
And I remember this deal was one of the most important ones during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we had 3 contestants for the vaccine. So how legal is it to negotiate and finalize a deal of this importance through texting?
Well, if the allegations are found to be true, they may have been, for example, some unfair competition with the other pharma companies producing the COVID-19 vaccine. Because if you remember well, Pfizer was not the only pharmaceutical company to produce the vaccine. There was also Moderna, AstraZeneca, Novavax. And so these other companies, they could have been, unfair competition. And also, That would mean that the deal was set up without taking into account any legal procedure.
And the Pfizer contract had parts of its confidentiality clause blacked out.
Sur les négociations et les contrats, tout d'abord, c'est l'opacité à tous les étages.
On contracts and negotiations, there's a lack of transparency on all levels. Despite requests from our parliament, information regarding negotiations is withheld. And here they are, for those who haven't seen them. Crucial details such as price, delivery schedules, and liability clauses are redacted, said MEP Manon Aubry in February 2021, while showing the blacked-out clauses from the Pfizer contract. Showing how secretive it was, also the European Commission couldn't share any confidential information without Pfizer's permission. Out of the 3 contracts studied, the Pfizer one had the most redacted sections.
Of course, the contracts are kept secret, but teams of experts from all member states have to negotiate between themselves following a very strict process based on EU trade rules.
So why are we talking about Pfizer CEO now?
We're talking again about Bourla now because a Belgian court in Liège will hold a hearing on 17th of May where it will be actually decided whether Belgian or EU prosecutors are competent to continue the Pfizergate. Because, as I said, the investigation is still going on. And, of course, everyone involved in the Pfizergate, so von der Leyen, the defense, the civil society, but also Bourla, they have been called to attend the hearing. However, there are few chances that Bourla shows up because actually it can be represented by one of his lawyers.
It's true that Albert Bourla didn't appear to any of the hearings regarding this investigation, even though MEPs were particularly interested in the exchange in order to shed light on how the COVID-19 vaccines contracts were struck. So I remember the media were reporting back then that Mr. Bourla pulled out of the appearance a few days before the hearing, following the publication of a report by the European Court of Auditors, which raised new questions about the way the third contract between the EU and Pfizer was negotiated. And on the other side, we had the Commission trying to justify and to provide some explanation that wasn't quite convincing.
Well, obviously, when this scandal broke out, the Commission has to give answers. It's matters of transparency. And NGO, MEPs, journalists, but also people from civil society, they had a lot of questions regarding the Pfizergate. To this day, the Commission's answer was to say the text messages had disappeared and that they could not find them, which, of course, this type of answer made the scandal even bigger.
In January 2022, the European Ombudsman, Emily O'Reilly, criticized the lack of transparency from the Commission's side.
But we basically were stonewalled by the Commission and, they still really haven't even admitted that they exist, but it's clear that they do. And Mr. Bourla, who's the head of Pfizer, subsequently written a book and he said that, effectively part of the informal negotiations in relation to the ultimate purchasing of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines were done through, this sort of informal contacts, emails, WhatsApps with Madame von der Leyen, the President of the Commission.
Although the text messages were mentioned in his book, Albert Bourla declined an invitation from the COVID committee to respond to questions regarding how the deal was sealed. But coming back to what is happening currently, the European Public Prosecutor's Office took over the case this year, but you have reported that there have been some jurisdictional disputes on who is legally responsible for it. So what's the state of play now, and what can we expect to happen?
So yes, indeed, the hearing at the Court of Liège happening today aims to decide if the European Public Prosecutor's Office or the Court of Liège will take over the case, because at the moment it's a bit uncertain who is the most skilled to take care of the case. There are high chances that the European Public Prosecutor takes over.
Coming back to Bourla, it appears that nothing has managed to hurt his reputation at all. How did the whole scandal affect him?
Well, it does not look like the scandal affected him a lot. I think there are many reasons why, but one that comes to my mind first is that he's actually living in the US and not in Europe, so it's a bit far away from it. And also he never showed to any of the European Parliament hearing or the court hearing. So in the end, we know his name, but we don't really know exactly who he is. It's not like we could recognize him in the streets. And then let's not forget that the scandal involves a very famous name in the EU bubble, who is, of course, course, the head of the Commission, von der Leyen. So it's pretty clear that she gets all the attention, especially in this context of the EU elections coming in June. And for example, if you see the headlines in media talking about the case, there is always the name of von der Leyen first, and then comes Bourla.
But also, how did this affect the vaccine deals?
If the allegations are found to be true, there may have been some unfair competition with the other pharma companies producing the COVID-19 vaccine, like Novavax, AstraZeneca, or Moderna. And also it would mean that the deal was set up illegally because, of course, for any deal, any contract that is made between the Commission and a company, whether it's a pharmaceutical company or not, of course, there are rules to follow based on EU trade, single market and EU trade rules.
So what influence does he have? Do we know if he has any ties to other politicians or?
It is hard to say precisely what influence Bourla has, especially since the investigation is still going on. So he's not found guilty for now. It's important to say it. I do not know if he has ties to any other politician. However, if the Pfizergate is found to be true, it is pretty fair to say that Bourla, even from the US, has an important impact in Europe and can have an impact on trade and deals that are made between the member states and the Commission.
Right, you're mentioning that this case may have an impact on EU politics, but when can we expect to have the results from the hearing? Surely not within the next few days, I would assume.
I think it is fair to say that we are not going to see any results before the election, but more likely after the election, because the election are in a month. And for example, as I said, today we're going to decide which court is the most competent to investigate the case. So no, there will be no result before the election. But this is also, even if there is no result, that can have an impact on Ursula von der Leyen, because, for example, if she was found not guilty, there could have been a positive impact just before the election on her candidacy.
So what should we keep from who is Albert Bourla and what's happening with the case?
I think what we should keep in mind is that, of course, there are rules that have been set up, especially for this kind of case. Whenever there is a big company that has to set up a deal with the Commission or with the member states, I think these rules were made to keep everything transparent. Of course, the contract, they remain secret. But I think it also says that the European citizens, MEPs, journalists, and NGOs, the transparency is very important to them, because we can see that this case was taken to court, which is something quite big because we are talking about the head of the Commission. So I think, this is something very important to European citizens, is transparency. And this is something that could have an impact on von der Leyen candidacy to the EU elections.
Thank you, Clara, for joining me on this episode. I am Evi Chiori, and this was Euractiv's Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news, sign up for our podcast newsletter, and if you haven't subscribed or followed us yet, you can find us on all streaming platforms. Also, make sure to leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help us a lot to spread the word about our content. And this episode was produced by Miriam Saenz de Tejada, Nicoleta Yonta, and myself. Thank you for tuning in, and we will be with you again on Tuesday morning. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.